All right. Welcome to Nerdifyed, you nerds. I'm here with Cranberrylangers, and I am known as the Cape is a Lie. Typically, we have the Wilhelm Scream here with us, but he's not able to make it at this time. I'm sure he'll recap some of this later on.
How shameful.
I know.
Yeah.
So shameful. Shame. All the shame.
All the shame.
Wilhelm Scream, you cannot be here. Oh well. But maybe next time. Uh,
Okay.
so today we've decided that we're going to talk about the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
I know that we've got the Rings of Power going on Amazon right now. I'm kind of checking out some of the episodes. I don't think Cranberrylangers has been able to dive in there yet, but hopefully he will eventually. Um, it's pretty interesting content. I don't know how I feel about it yet. I'm kind of riding it through to see where it all ends. I think it's filmed pretty well. I like the visual effects and stuff, and so far what they're giving us seems to be pretty in line with I guess the history of Middle Earth. But we'll see how it all turns out when it's all finished up, and maybe we'll do a recap episode when that happens. Um, but as of right now, Cranberrylangers, having read The Fellowship of the Ring and The Hobbit, what is your favorite item?
Oh, I thought you were going to say color. Oh, okay. My favorite item, excuse me, I think would be, oh, I had it. I think my favorite item would be Sting.
Yeah, that's mine too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Good choice.
I was like, please don't say Sting. Please don't say Sting.
I love Sting.
Okay. Sting is awesome.
Okay, I could go for Glamdring then. I could
Okay.
go for Orc Crest or yeah, what is it? Orc Crest and Orc or Goblin Hammer, Orc Crest, I forget. But yeah, no, I love Sting. I wanted Sting as a kid. Actually as a child, I whittled a little knife out of wood and I
Okay.
named it Sting and I carved it in into the name.
That's
I mean
awesome.
into the hill.
I
Yeah.
think if I had to choose a second favorite item, I am like really interested in Bilbo's mithril
That's a good.
chainmail.
That would have been my second choice.
Like,
Or
oh yeah. And then after watching the Rings of Power, like it adds a little bit more to that, but we'll get into that one later. I'll have you check out the show and then we can open up that topic of discussion. But Sting is awesome.
yes,
Um, do you remember how Bilbo came across Sting?
yes, yes, I do. When he went into the bottom of, I think the Lonely Mountain. No, no, not the Lonely Mountains. Into the which mountain? Which mountains? Uh, I think it was when he went into the Misty Mountains. When he was in the Goblin caves, he went deep down, 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 down to the bottom of the mountain, and there in the pitch black in the darkness. Oh no, 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 no! It was when it was when he was riding one of the dwarves, and when in the Hobbit when Gandalf was leading them out of the tunnels, out of the Goblin tunnels, out of their hive, and in the midst of that, he fell. He it was in the dark. He noticed something on the ground. He noticed it was metallic, and that's when he discovered the One Ring. Yes,
I thought that Sting was given to him before that, though. Am I wrong?
that Sting was given to the Sting. Wait, did you said to Bilbo, right?
Yeah.
I thought you mentioned the ring. I thought you were saying the ring.
Oh, I meant to say Sting if I said the ring. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Sting. I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting question. Sting. Sting. He got in. Let's see. I think he got Sting in.
the Elves. The Elves.
Was it the Elves?
Huh? What?
Was it that he got that? What did he get Sting with the Elves?
I'm fairly certain he did.
I thought he might have gotten it from the. I thought he might have gotten it from the Trolls.
Um, that
They
doesn't
got
sound right because he would have had to have gotten Sting from the Elves because that's where he found out the name.
no he. The name of Sting.
Yeah.
He got the he I think he said the name of Sting was when he was in the forest, Mirkwood Forest, when he first looked at the sword, or when he was going with the sword, and he's like, oh, it looks like it could maybe am I am I am I mixing these? Am I confusing these? I thought he so how did he I thought he either got it with the trolls. Something is saying the elves, but I'm not remembering it clearly there.
If I remember correctly, he couldn't carry like a normal sword, and so
Right.
he was given Sting to defend himself. And they told him what the name of it was because it wasn't like a normal sword. It was kind of like a um, what do they call it?
It was an
Not
elfin
not
sword.
a dagger.
It was a short sword.
Yeah, it was a short sword. It was something that he could carry around
for,
with him.
for an elf.
Uh,
I don't think he I don't think they named it Sting.
I thought they did. I'm gonna have to go back and recheck that now. Maybe we'll cover
No.
that next time. But
Yeah.
I could have swore that they had given it the name Sting before he
No.
owned it.
No.
Because the whole thing is it was created to fight against the goblins, wasn't it? Because
Orcs, goblins.
yeah,
Yeah.
it glows like blue along with
Bill
the other.
Bilbo named it Sting.
Okay, but it's still one of the legendary swords that glows whenever the
Yeah.
orcs or goblins
Well,
are
well,
around.
it might be legendary. The thing is, from what I got from context, is that it was one of a class of weapons that the elves had during the Goblin Wars
Okay,
that would glow, it would respond in certain ways, or it would glow around the presence of goblins and orcs and stuff.
okay.
Um,
Well, I'll have to go back and double check that. But yeah, favorite item. Great. I'm glad that we're both in agreement.
I
Agreement
agreement.
on
Yeah.
agreement on Sting. That's awesome.
I loved it. I thought if it responded to jerks at school, it would have been really useful. Criminals, maybe.
It starts
There we
glowing like
go.
red or blue. Like, yep, danger,
They
danger.
probably wouldn't
Like,
let
what?
me in. Carrying a short sword to into the school. At least not outwardly, not in public view, but
Yeah.
check it out, guys.
Well, so we've gone through the Hobbit, we've gone through the Fellowship. Did you watch the movies in preparation for our talk here, or did you just read the books?
No, I didn't watch the movies. I've watched the movies quite a few times. I have a pretty solid memory of the movies. I owned them, the director's cut and everything. So
Extended versions and spent hours watching the movies over and over again because it was the best thing that we had.
no, I'm not
No?
gonna say that. No.
Oh, no, as far as live action goes, it's not the best thing that we have for Lord of the Rings.
For Lord of the Rings, yes, it is.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, I still think that they could do better. And Fellowship, I'm of the belief right now, like if somebody does it right, you could potentially have two movies for the Fellowship alone.
Yes.
I don't like what they did with The Hobbit. I think The Hobbit could have easily been done in one movie and a lot better than what they did with it.
I didn't even bother. I
Ugh,
did. I didn't even
good for
bother. I
you.
saw. Huh? You envy me?
Good for you.
Because I saw how I was ticked at Peter Jackson, honestly, because I remembered the books when I was watching the movies, and I was like, you have gone so far off on a bunch of these things, and I adore the characters, and they're very important to me, and seeing what he did, Peter Jackson did, I was ticked off like quite a few times during the movies, and I'm like, you know what? If it's gonna be this level in The Hobbit, I'm not gonna watch it.
The Hobbit series was strictly just a money grab, and it's
Yeah,
so frustrating because, like, those of us who read The Hobbit and actually know what that book is about, having, even watched like the early, what is it, like 80s cartoon, like,
I actually thought, from what I've seen and from what I hear, the '80s cartoon was more close to the Hobbit than what you see in the trilogy, the Hobbit trilogy.
yes, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, that's the best way that I can put it. And
and I hate the
sadly, like,
graphics.
yeah, I mean, but it's still like, if you're going to watch anything pertaining to The Hobbit, skip the live action movies, go watch the cartoon and suffer through it like the rest of us did. But I mean, it really isn't that hard of a watch. It really is pretty interesting, and it gives you the story of Bilbo and everything leading up to the Fellowship of the Ring. I think it's a great like baseline to kind of get started on, and you learn a lot about like Middle Earth and the different characters in there. You don't know really anything about the Lord of the Rings at that point. You kind of discover the ring, but you don't know what the ring entails in The Hobbit, which is pretty interesting. And I like how you come into the Fellowship and there's so much more to learn and to know when you're reading through the Fellowship. Uh, that was just my personal take on having read through the two books, and having watched the shows. Cranberrylangers?
Oh yeah, I it did introduce you to the ring. It didn't really fill in a ton of the histories and everything about it. It even mentions that in The Hobbit. That it doesn't. And from what I know, I read a little bit of synopsis, or I read a brief synopsis or a brief overview of when Tolkien actually wrote the Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring, and well, and the Lord of the Rings, the book, or the and he said that he actually changed things, between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, that it wasn't exactly the same, and he actually went, I'm going to fill in stuff now, and he actually had to make some edits and stuff. I don't know what those edits were, but it does. I kind of prefer The Hobbit to the Fellowship of the Ring.
Really?
Yeah,
Huh.
because it seems more grounded to me.
Okay.
It seems more contained, and contained in that, you know, it isn't a huge epic. I mean, from reading The Hobbit how things are interconnected and interlaced and everything, but there were some contradictions in there that I thought that Tolkien didn't actually he didn't he didn't account for them, or he wasn't anticipating doing these things until after people were clamoring for another book or more story.
Was The
um,
Hobbit written before the Fellowship was?
that is the question. I i think it I'm not sure. um, I think it makes sense for it to be written before, but I'm not positive on that. I
I
do know I do know that there are incongruencies between the two. One of them being one of them being that in The Hobbit, at the like one of the last lines was that you're a very small person in the grand scheme of history or whatever. You're very small, okay? You're a very inconsequential person. But the thing is, if if you refer to it, if you look at it in total, like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, he wouldn't be a small player. He'd be one of the biggest players in The Lord of the Rings, in the whole epic, in the whole thread of history. And so I think that kind of pointed to it. Also, one of the other things is in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien doesn't mention in The Hobbit. In Lord of the Rings, Tolkien mentions that an effect of the ring is that you can see less of the world. You see more of the shades of the world, but you don't actually see the physicality. I mean, it's not clear for you when the ring is present on your hand.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that in the Hobbit story, in the Hobbit book, it doesn't mention that at all. It doesn't have any reference to the shadows or everything being in that view. So that's, to me, another sign that it was a story that was written aside from the Lord of the Rings, and he didn't have it wasn't one at a time, and so and again, things like you're not that important. Gandalf isn't going, I mean, you can say it's part of Gandalf's ignorance, but as to the fact that he didn't actually, he didn't go, he didn't have more, he didn't have more of a realization that this was the One Ring, or that Bilbo was actually really important. And another thing that bothered me is that Smeagol, Gollum in The Hobbit,
Smeagol.
it actually addresses something that was like one of the biggest problems for me in the Lord of the Rings movies, which was the portrayal of Smeagol. Smeagol is black. He is really black in The Hobbit. It actually mentions when he first meets Bilbo in the cave at the bottom of the mountain. It actually describes his shade of skin, and his shade is it's black.
It's like a bluish black, isn't it? That's what they describe it as.
Exactly.
And
that's right.
That's one of the things that I was planning on talking about, that because like they've kind of messed up in like how he looks. I get like they were trying to like make him look as though he had like color drained from him.
Right.
But that's not what the book describes it as. And
no.
What I think the failure is that Gollum is very old, and he's survived many generations due to the power of the ring.
Right.
And with that, you would have death and deterioration that kind of sets in over time. His senses have all but like dwindled, and he's become like this cave dwelling being.
Yeah.
He's kind of down there like by himself, living in this area away from all society because he's guarding his precious. And I think that would have been a good tie into that story, is like the reason why he's down there in that cave away from everything and everybody and is this feared creature is because of who he is and what kind of power the ring has.
Also, they showed in the movies that he was chased out. I mean, he was chased out by the peoples that he lived with, his village or whatever. But the thing is, he didn't. He actually went into the mountains because he actually hated the sun. It was bitter to him, biting, like almost vampiric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I wanted to see it. Huh?
Go ahead.
I wanted to see him with the black stuff. I wanted to see him with the black skin, and I wanted to see him with those big globular? No, not globular. Like lamp-like eyes that had these different colors shining out. I completely think his genetics or whatever were altered when he was spending so much time with the ring on and everything, just living for thousands of years, and just he
was feeding off like fish in this like cave where like who knows what the fish are and have, and he's like basically just surviving off of this stuff that may actually be toxic to normal river hobbit beings, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of crazy too, is like the things that would like probably normally kill him didn't kill him, actually sustained him, kept him alive while he's living in darkness. And like that's where he chose to live it out, which is, I think, a pretty crazy part of that story. And just for clarification, I did look it up real quick. The Hobbit was written in 1937. The Lord of the Rings books were first published in 1954 and 1955 in 3 different segments.
Yeah.
So The Hobbit was written first. I actually never knew that before. Somebody had told me a while back that The Hobbit may have actually been written after, but that's not true at all. So that helped me. Just in case anybody else is looking for that information.
Yeah. I mean, I figured, but I think I had heard somewhere as well. Someone was saying something similar to that, but yeah, I know that he definitely did Lord of the Rings in installments, and I know he wrote it during the war. So in that war, which I found out he didn't base the books off of any of the wars that were happening at the time. It was just his own story.
Imagination. Yeah.
Imagination.
Yeah. I know that was pretty cool. Yeah, that kind of like really changes my perspective on how he's written these things. Like I never knew that before. That's pretty cool. So let's talk about the Fellowship a little bit and really dive into that. They missed a lot in the movies. Like basically
Yes.
the whole first half of the book is gone.
Yes.
In the Fellowship of the Ring movie. And
I hate it.
That's fair, because I think that there are some really interesting characters in the Fellowship of the Ring that should have been featured in the movie, and they glossed over in like its entirety. For example, Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadil, yeah. He was one of my favorite characters, and I looked forward to seeing him in the movies. And yeah, that's one of the reasons I was like, this isn't the Lord of the Rings. And I heard people who are great fans, people who are better fans than me, and they were like touting it. They're like, "Oh man, this is the greatest thing. It's completely accurate to the book." And I'm like, "Are you reading the same book I'm reading? Because he's leaving out like a third of the story, and he's also switching lines around and completely jumbling everything, and not giving like not realistic, but not realistic portrayals of characters and stuff." I'm like, yeah, the events are jumbled. I'm like, this is not the Lord of the Rings. Okay, it's nice fanfic, but
I feel like Tom Bombadil was a major part of that story, and like there's in my mind right now, like there's like a piece of like cinema history that's missing because Tom Bombadil wasn't in there. Like the whole story behind how the hobbits get out of the Shire. You have Farmer Maggot. They come up to his place. You kind of hear about him and how, they fear him because when they were kids, they used to trespass on his property looking for mushrooms. And then, like, they meet him. They're, like, basically kind of young adults at this point. And he's like, okay, well, yeah, it looks like you're involved with some bad people, so I'm going to help you out. And he does. Also, I don't know if anybody else realized it, but Frodo gets a new house before he leaves the Shire.
Wait, before you leave Farmer Maggot, because Maggot is a great thing to stay on. I just want to say, Farmer Maggot, just like many of the other hobbits, weren't given a fair shake in the movies. Like Farmer Maggot, and it's referenced. It's like it's seen throughout it's in The Hobbit and throughout the Lord of the Rings. The hobbits actually have they have more perception than people give them credit for. They're actually very perceptive. They're like people, but they're on their toes. No pun intended. They are on their toes, and they're wise. They're kind of crafty and everything throughout it. And that was one thing that I hated about the Lord of the Rings movies. They treated them like children. They looked like idiotic children. But if anything, these were like people that you'd meet on the street or whatever that, they're dealing with like a terrible situation, using all their wits about them and everything.
They're the equivalent to men at the very least, if not above men in their intelligence and perception.
That's true.
And I think that the movies did them a great disservice by portraying them as like almost childlike.
I agree.
And they played into like the whole height factor, like, oh, well, the man is, bigger, taller, and so they're going to be heroic and wiser, while the hobbits are kind of like
comedic effect.
What's that?
Their comedic effect.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's fair to them at all.
No.
I mean, now, to be fair,
I think that they have the higher stature morally or whatever, that they show themselves above men many times.
Yes. But also, Gandalf does refer to Peregrine Took as a fool in the book, so I mean that part is true. You fool of a took.
Which has more meaning after rereading The Hobbit again.
Because there's a few different times where you're kind of like, huh, okay, I understand this now. Not that the movies did a horrible job with him, because I don't think they did a horrible job. I just think like they didn't really discuss the age factor. I think another part of that was Peregrine Took was younger than the rest of the company that decided
like a kid brother.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the reason why he was referred to that so many times, because he was young, curious, and still learning. And so, he did a lot of stupid stuff. And as a kid, that's kind of what happens. But I feel like they mixed everybody into that kind of personality trait, which is like, oh, well, these are all like children. And that's not how it was supposed to be at all. Like maybe Peregrine Took was more of the child, like
teenagerish.
Yeah, but even still, that's not what everybody else was. Mary had a very good relationship with Farmer Maggot. He was the whole reason why they were able to sit down and talk things over with Farmer Maggot and get his help. And I did find it interesting as well that Tom Bombadil talked about Farmer Maggot and how he knows him and actually thinks very highly of him.
I completely agree. These are the things. These are the implications and this is the detail. These are the details that really inform. These people aren't what they look like. They aren't what they seem, and they're not given a fair shake at all in the movies. They're just not portrayed at all like how they are in the books. They're very deep.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to them. And so, yeah, you have Farmer Maggot, who's got a pretty deep character and personality. Definitely not given the fair shake in the movies. You have Frodo, where they didn't quite discuss like everything that actually happens in the Shire with him before he leaves, in that he had to move out of Bag End. He had to establish a new house because he knew that the riders were coming after him. That was a big part of the story of, when he was in the Shire. They were trying to hide him, and so they like got him a new place. And while all this is happening, Frodo is kind of thinking in the back of his mind, like, I'm gonna have to leave these guys and leave all this stuff anyways. And then they're like, yeah, we know what you're gonna do. We're going with you anyways. So I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah.
To have a group of friends like that are that loyal and willing to stick it out with you, I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And then so you kind of like hear from them, and they're like, well, we can't go this way because we got the rider coming after us. And another thing, like the riders in the Fellowship of the Ring, they're all talked about having like these black horses.
Yeah.
And I think if I remember correctly in the Fellowship, like you see that for a brief period of time, and then it's like very focused on um like the Nazgul and um the dragons and stuff in the movies. And so you don't
Well,
really catch a whole lot about the horses and the riders after the Fellowship happens.
well, they do cut out like a third or more of the story, so that would reduce their time that you'd see them, I would think, as well.
Yeah, I just think that they're a bigger part of the Fellowship than what we were given.
Hmm.
I do think that they should have been given a bit more of a spotlight, and like the fear that is felt when these writers are present, because they're basically they are the ones that you see in the end riding on like the dragons and stuff. They were the ones that had um, the rings of power before.
Yeah.
Um, I thought it was interesting that. Well, okay, I'm I'm skipping ahead. I'm trying to keep myself in line with the book here, so that way I don't move around too much on you, and I apologize.
No, no, no,
Um,
good.
so Tom Bombadil, the hobbits are getting out of the Shire. They're running. They go through the forest. They come across the willow, and the willow like goes to like eat them up.
Old Man Willow.
Old man
Yeah.
Willow.
Yeah.
Um, and then Tom Bombadil comes along and just kind of like whispers,
Yeah.
and he like spits them out. Like,
Exactly.
that was like to see that in the movies would have been great. Um, I do wish that we got some Tom Bombadil action on the screen because
Yeah.
he is a very unique character. The way that they described him in the book was that he is like from the
He's
beginning of time, like he's existed and he's been there.
right.
And I thought it was interesting. They hand him the ring and he just kind of looks at it, and it's like a trinket or a toy to him. Like
Right.
it has no relevance to him whatsoever. He's like, oh, okay, cool. Like he's like, what is this? And then like even when I'm gonna skip a little bit ahead here, when they get to the council with the elves and Elrond and all them, they're talking about Tom Bombadil. Maybe we could ask him to take it, and maybe he'll do it. And they're like, no, Tom Bombadil doesn't care because it has no relevance to him and it has no power over him. So he just throw it off to the side, and then it wouldn't get destroyed, and we needed this thing destroyed. So
Yeah, it just end up in their hands or something later on or whatever, or it'd be even like found even speedier or something, and he just wouldn't care. He'd be like, yeah. Oh, what? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna go check out some plants over here. I'm gonna go stare at my wife for a couple hours and
yeah,
think about it. And that something I also felt that was missing because Tom Bombadil was addressed as he was kind of like from other stories or whatever. He's kind of outside of the Lord of the Rings. Apparently, that's what is referenced, and that was how Peter Jackson referenced. I think that was one of the reasons he didn't feature Tom Bombadil. By the way, he was crucial. Such big things happened with Tom Bombadil. I mean, like he gave weapons and the armor and stuff to the guys, and you learn about the barrow wraiths and how there are other things other than the ring wraiths that exist. There are other creatures out there, but he didn't want to include it because he felt like it didn't fit and that it would take too long or whatever. But the thing is, I thought that Tom Bombadil, his introduction what it did was it actually set up that this is actually a bigger story than it's actually a bigger event happening. It's a touch of the infinite, and it's a touch of the hugeness of the story, the spiritual story, the story that's been arranged, destiny, that kind of thing. Because how he's used, and it kind of clues you in, probably clued in. Maybe not at the moment, but clued in Frodo and maybe the other guys that this is actually not like a small adventure they're going on. This is actually really big stakes, and world universe shaping things are happening around you, these five guys and a ring and their ponies.
I did think it was interesting how like they're getting ready to leave, and Tom Bombadil says like, if you need my help when you're passing through, these lands or whatever, you know, basically call out for me and I will come and help you.
Yeah.
And that happens. And none of that is anywhere to be found. And you're just kind of sitting there like, oh gosh, like this is such a huge part of this. Like before they get to the tavern, all of that happens. And then they get to the tavern.
I hated it.
Yeah. And you're kind of like sitting there like, oh, okay.
I mentioned over and over again, I would have loved to have watched like 6 3-hour movies. I wouldn't have minded. I would have minded a trilogy just on the Fellowship of the Ring. I would have minded. I would have sat through it, and I think other people would have too, because they sat through it before. I mean, they sat through 9 hours or whatever before for the series, the trilogies.
Yeah. It's just, yeah. Hopefully we get a remake at some point in time and they actually decide to include him and do the story right. I just that's my feeling on it. Like I don't think we're going to get it anytime soon. Like maybe sometime in the next 20 years I could see somebody making an attempt to bring everything back to life and put it up on the screen. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I think that not having him there was a big mistake on the part of what's his name?
Peter Jackson.
Peter Jackson. There you go. Sorry, my brain's just kind of like back and forth here.
You know what?
You don't have him. You don't have Goldberry. Get to the tavern. They describe the Ranger, and so I'm listening to like the description of the Ranger. I'm thinking about the movie, and I'm like, man, they missed the mark here too.
Yeah, they did. He doesn't look like that.
No, and I think that's Hollywood for you. They want to make everybody appealing and have everybody be easy on the eyes. But sorry to disappoint everybody. The Ranger in the book was not appealing, was not very easy on the eyes. People were actually wary of him because he looks super sketchy. And yeah, I mean, they said like he had gray hair. He wasn't. He didn't look kingly, I should say, in the Fellowship. I guess that's the best way for me to put it.
But he was supposed to, and and the men of the Numenor, the Numenorians, they were supposed to be like supermen, really. They're supposed to be like the apex man, the apex human, and he looked more like a Viggo Mortensen. No offense, Viggo. Looked like he doesn't look like a Superman. And the other thing is the demeanor was off. I mean, they got a lot of lines and everything right, but he was more cautious and everything in his speech, and it was just slightly off. I thought it was pretty close, having reread Fellowship of the Ring. I thought it was closer than I expected, but still, it was off in my opinion.
I'm really curious on what your take of the Rings of Power is going to be when you watch the show, because they explore Numenor quite a bit. And you have like a lot of the history of the elves and like how that all comes about. Um, and think I want to say with like the most recent episode that I've watched, you're kind of like seeing Mordor in its early
Pretty,
stages.
yeah.
So it's pretty interesting, and I can't wait to get your take on that. Um, so I do want you to watch that.
All right. Yeah.
um, having talked about that, let's talk
Oh,
about Glorfindel.
all right. All right. All right. Are we gonna get to the river at some point?
That's why I'm bringing this up
All right. Okay.
because I think that is a huge mishap.
I'll tell you this. Glorfindel was one of my favorite characters when I read Lord of the Rings.
He's awesome.
Yes,
He's
he
so
is.
cool.
And
And you're just like,
they completely axed him
yeah,
from
yeah.
the book. Yeah, he was actually important. He was like one of the first like meetings of elves, and like he was, yeah, he was regal. He had tons of history behind him. He was manly, and the thing is, they don't really show elves like manly elves or whatever in the movies. I mean, more, but he was actually manly. He was willing to fight,
I
that
mean,
kind of
you
stuff.
have Legolas.
Right, right. But this is before you get into this is before you get there, right? This is before you
Yeah,
get to so but even he's manlier than Legolas, but he had uh but he did at least at this point. And another thing, he made like huge sacrifices. It's where you see someone willing to get into the dirt for this group of people. He's willing to confront. Yeah, okay, all right.
yeah.
You
No,
have
no, you're
thoughts.
right. That's exactly where we need to go with this. Is because he was like the warrior elf, and he was the one like they're like, oh yeah, like this guy is like the top military like ranking elf. Like you don't mess with this dude, and
Yeah,
like everybody acknowledged that, and it wasn't just like
he's bad.
yeah, oh yeah, like
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
all like, oh yeah, we don't mess with this guy because this guy can cut off our head. But at the same
yeah.
time, like he's also trusted, and he is somebody that is I don't know if I call him charismatic, but he's well liked among everybody there. Like people don't fear him, you know. And I thought that was a big part of it too. Like he goes and he sits down with the council when they're making the fellowship, and they're bringing all the people together, and like one of the things that they decide is that he's not going to go with them because like his place is there to defend
Rivendell.
their home, yeah,
Yeah.
Rivendell. um
And
I
they give it to what? And they give it to Arwen. Like, and I was like, what are you? See, I can't call it Lord of the Rings. I can't call it Lord of the Rings. It's a fan flick. Anyways, because you're not doing Lord of the Rings. If you're chopping up,
I mean, if you're
I
trying to
can call,
condense it into like a 2-hour movie,
I can call it three quarters of Lord of the Rings.
yeah, I mean, I get like them trying to condense it into a 2-hour movie. I get like the whole like river scene and whatnot. Like I thought like as far as the graphics and stuff go for like what happened at the river scene, I thought that was on point. As far as who made that happen,
No,
that
no,
frustrated
it
me.
diminished Gandalf. It diminished
Elrond,
Elrond. It diminished what's his face?
Glorfindel.
Glorfindel. It diminished Frodo. It diminished all these huge important characters because I don't know. You want to have a lady in there? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Peter
She
Jackson
was
just has a
she
crush.
was the focal point of that scene in the movies, and it took out 4 other different characters, and they're just like, yeah, we're just gonna have her do it,
Yeah,
and it really takes away from part of that story because you're missing a character in their entirety, and he's a pretty major player as far as the Fellowship goes and what he
Yeah,
does to help them along the way.
yeah.
So, like, you have Tom Bombadil who gives them like weapons and items, comes and saves them, like when they're in trouble, and then you're witnessing like almost the same kind of thing happen with Glorfindel as they're trying to make their way to Rivendell. Frodo's been stabbed at this point. He's potentially turning into a ring wraith, and they describe that too. They're like, yeah, by the way, if he doesn't get help, he's going to become just like these people chasing you, and he will forever be tortured because he can't have the ring,
It's
and he
another
will
thing. Yeah.
forever want the ring because, yeah,
That's another thing. They don't showcase the fact that he can see things clear because of how he was stabbed by the ring wraith, how he's able to view the spiritual realm clear, and he even seeing non-dark, non-evil entities, spiritual entities like elves and stuff, how he has that perception, greater perception of them,
mm-hmm.
and how he can see clear at night and everything else because of his experience with the ring and with the Morgul blade that he was stabbed with. They don't address these things in the movies, and these are things that are like, he is now one of the top Frodo is now one of the top characters of the Fellowship right now, and it's through things that are being, you can see them as chance, but he's definitely up there with like special abilities now, above like the other hobbits.
Yeah,
And
there's things that have happened to him that have kind of catapulted him into that position. And like, so they're having the Fellowship, and they're all kind of talking about like, okay, who's going to take the ring? Maybe we should have Glorfindel do it. Maybe this, that, and the other. And they're like, and well, that's not going to work. And then Frodo's like, all right, obviously it's got to be me. Like, so I'm just going to speak up and say, I'm going to go. And so that's what happens. And then Sam followed them into the meeting. He wasn't ever supposed to go into the meeting, but he did. And so they're like, yeah, we're going to have you go with it. And then the others get mad because they told Sam that he can go with. And then they're like, well, you weren't even supposed to be there anyways, and you followed him in. Like, I thought that was pretty funny. Like,
another thing that bothered me was seeing in the movies how they portrayed them at the meeting and how they're all bickering and everything. That didn't happen, and that was something that bothered me as well. And I didn't see, and they also didn't have a, and it wasn't like him shouting over other people. It was a composed group of people really being serious about the situation and being quiet and considerate and everything. And yeah, and Bilbo was there, and they don't really show Bilbo in the movie. At least I don't
no, he's kind
recall.
of off to the side and treated as an old man that's kind of going senile. And in the book, like, he has a song, and like, he's known to the elves for making songs, and they enjoy his songs. But then they talk about how like the elves are some of the greatest songwriters. So for him to be esteemed by the elves in such a way is really a great honor, which
Yes,
I think again downplays the hobbits even more, because like they are now like a relevant race of
right.
people.
Right, they're
um,
just, they are the question from the question in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings throughout, from the books, is that what use are these people? I mean, these people are diminutive. What kind of help can they be? They're useless. They're like little children or something, and we're gonna have to help them around all the time. Uh, and the thing is, in the movies, it pretty much confirmed that instead of showing their actual worth and their value and showing the concept that these little people are actually big people in the world. They're actually big and they're actually important despite how diminutive they are in size. And just despite how people look down on them, they are actually some of the higher quality people around there, and they are very special despite what they look like. Instead of that, they confirm it in the movies. They actually say they are lesser. They
yeah,
actually,
and that's how the movies portray them, is lesser than everybody else, which I think is wrong,
yeah,
because they do huge things in the books and in the movies, and they're not really given the credit for doing those things, which is like, I don't know, it's kind of like mind blowing. Like, how can you miss the mark so bad?
I don't think he was a fan of the books, honestly. Or I think that Peter Jackson, I think Peter Jackson had a perception of how the world works, and then he brought that into the movies. And I think that he allowed that to alter how the books were done, because I was like, if you're reading this, it's not the same story.
Is
It's
it
not
Peter
the same.
Jackson or is it Hollywood though? Like, I think Hollywood does that with a lot of different stories. Um, and it's
What?
kind of, go ahead.
Well, I would say I think Hollywood enables it. So they usually go, okay, now you have this book, do with it what you want. You're the go-to guy, you're the director, you're the showrunner for this source material that you're going to be using.
Let's
The
have your vision. I've heard that before. Like, let's have your vision. Let's have your take on this. And
right.
it's like, okay, but you're like the whole point to you doing a live action whatever is not to remake the story for your own personal benefit. It's
And he
to
did.
tell the story that people know and love. And I think that's where people are missing the mark so much nowadays. And it's kind of frustrating because like you've got really good material out there that they're just like, eh, well, we're going to do things this way because this is what's going to be popular with people.
Oz
And
books are surprisingly good, by the way.
what's that?
The Oz books are surprisingly good, by the way.
Wizard of Oz?
The Oz, all of them, because there's more than the Wizard. Those are actually really detailed, adventure-y, kind of dark stories. Yeah, just saying.
Yeah. And that's another one where it's like, oh, well, let's Hollywood them up and make them feel good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I get it. But at the same time, like you've got a rich story, especially with Lord of the Rings. Tolkien was masterful in his craft. Um, that's the only way to put that. Like he knew how to write a story, and I think that's why there's such a big fan base. Like even with like the movies having come out, the whole reason the movies were made was because of how big of a fan base the books had before the
Right.
movies were ever made. The movies just amplified that. And then people went to the books and they're like, oh, for me, I watched the movie before I ever read the book. I read the book and I was disappointed with the movie.
Exactly. That's how you should be. I read the books and I was disappointed with the movies when I saw them. I was like, this is not the Lord of the Rings.
I
Thanks.
mean,
I wanted to watch a Lord of the Rings movie, not whatever Peter Jackson's his fantasies, fanfics are. You know, I don't
yes.
want to.
Now, let me clarify. All of the actors that played in The Lord of the Rings, I thought did a very good job of playing their specific character created by Peter Jackson in The Lord of the Rings. Those actors were fine, in my opinion.
I don't
The
disagree.
the story and how it was told is where I take issue because you take away from so much of the rich storytelling that Tolkien has by not,
Detail.
yeah, the details, everything that's in there, in this world, the songs, the items, the people, the whatever you're dealing with, the creatures. I mean, there's a lot that's to be desired because it's just not on screen. And my recommendation is if you have the opportunity, go and pick up the book, read the book for yourself. Having watched the movie, go read the book.
I recommend
Go
reading the
read the
books
book.
twice. It's they're much better than the movies, in my opinion.
I will say this, like my first time sitting down and trying to read the book, it was rough. Like it's a rough read to try and sit there for a few hours. If you have Audible, if you have um I guess some other kind of thing like Kindle or whatever where it'll read the story to you. Like you got drive time, you have time where you're just sitting around and you're looking to have something playing in the background, put it on, listen to it. It's great. It's a great story. And having it told from the book is awesome. Um, that's how I went through it this last time. I don't have time to really sit down and read for 2 3 hours a day, so I have a lot of drive time. I put it on Audible. I listen to it, and man, Audible's great for that reason.
It hurts. It hurts. It hurts knowing what wasn't in the movie. It hurts knowing that that wasn't what I wanted to see. I wanted to see uh, Gimli is another one. Gimli never got like a fair shake throughout the movies, and
Again, made fun of because he's smaller than the rest.
right, I know. It's the complete opposite. It's an inversion of it's kind of like sacrilege of what it's kind of like blasphemy, sacrilege for what the character should have been. I mean, that is not the character, and yeah, you just make him a joke. In reality, he was like one of the top guys. He is like superhuman, and people should be incredibly afraid. He's at least on par. Never mind. We haven't gotten to other books yet. um, but I don't like how they did that. And also Gandalf didn't look the way he was supposed to look. He didn't act how he's supposed to act in the I mean, again, good portrayals, but I blame the writers and I blame Peter Jackson, the director, for
Yeah. That's my favorite line out of the movie and out of the book. Gandalf, fool of a took.
Yeah. It's funny because something that I really appreciated as a child, I felt like I was I very much identified with Bilbo growing up, in that I had like these two aspects of me that were fighting. One was like I really wanted to be reserved, conservative, and just be like really proper and everything. The other side was like I want to go on adventures and kill bad people and like discover new lands and stuff, and I want to be wild and zany. So these were my and that was something you don't really pick up on. And yeah. Also, Boromir was also one. I'm sorry, I interrupted. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was going to say they talk about Bilbo and him, there at Rivendell, and I thought they did a pretty decent portrayal of him in the movie, where he goes and he puts on, or he doesn't put on the ring. He asks Frodo to see the ring, and in doing so, like, turns into another creature almost entirely when he's like looking at the ring. And then like the book describes it as like he turns into like this dark creature, and then he turns back and he goes,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is the reason why I can't, you need to put that away. Like, I can't have this anymore. And realizes like what he's done and what the ring makes him, which I thought was pretty crazy. And you kind of see a glimpse of that in the movies, but not to the extent that the book describes it, because the book like gives vivid detail of like how dark and twisted Bilbo became. And I think you got a pretty good representation like in the movie, but it's like for a good little while, like Bilbo becomes like this dark, twisted creature.
Yeah. Yeah. It very much, it's reminiscent of addiction and how people get when they don't have an addiction fulfilled. And he very much had an addiction. It's an addiction. It just has great physical representation, or it's displayed physically a lot more with Bilbo, but he he's a different creature. And also also the fact that how special that makes him. He's a curiosity in that world, Bilbo is. And he has and along with his poetic side, and with his tookish adventure side, and the fact that he's like, I'm gonna go hang out with some elves now. I'm just gonna go bounce out of my place.
I'm leaving the Shire, which we don't normally do, but this is what I'm doing, and I'm gonna go hang out with the elves and just sit there and chill out with them for a bit. So see you guys later. Like,
yeah, I'm gonna go hang out with people. I learn a different language. I've learned Elvish. You know who learns Elvish? I mean, and he's going over there, and then he has this side that's corrupt. He has this side that's corrupt. It's demonic-ish, and he has this portion of himself, and he's also like an aged person. You know, he's friendly. He jokes around and stuff, and he has all this knowledge, this great knowledge, and he's just a very interesting character. And yeah, but yeah, I thought
you
they
were
got
talking about Boromir?
Boromir. I thought was done dirty as well, very much.
Yeah,
It was kind of close, you know, the time where he gets abandoned by Frodo. It gets kind of close, but not quite. A lot of the movie portrayals, they seem to over emote, and I think that's a fault for modern movies, is that people can be more stoic and still convey emotion. They can
yeah,
still convey regret and everything. You don't have to cry. You don't have to be outward in your. You don't have to be obvious or whatever in your expressions of emotion. And I thought that they made him look weaker, Boromir look weaker in that than he did, because he was a lot more. He was a lot more. It showed him, like, in the time where he broke, like the other people who broke. This is the thing. In the same way that other people broke when they were confronted with the ring, with the possibility of having the ring, he had reasons, actual reasons for doing things. It wasn't an irrationality. In fact, he had a bunch of very good reasons to him, a bunch
yeah.
of very solid reasons. And actually, if you were to look at it without the fact that it would corrupt him, if you didn't know about that, you would say he actually had better reasons for having the ring than Frodo did, and at a time, and in
Yes.
that
Yeah.
perspective. Yeah. But they showed him as like raving mad and everything, and that's just not what
It
I
wasn't who he was.
no.
No, he was a very composed, put together person.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, the movie did him a disservice because that's not who he was. He wasn't just raving mad lunatic that was just like thirsty
For power.
or for power and like just wanted to have the ring to have the ring. Like, no, there was a rational thought process behind what he was thinking, and like there wasn't. I don't want to say like there wasn't any kind of evil desire behind it because I don't think that that's right either. But I that's not what you get reading the book.
No, and you also see his stalwart character that he has. He's very he's very upstanding. He's very noble. He's very courageous. And
Yeah,
they didn't show that in the movies. He
I think they did like through his death, but it was like
you
too little, too late.
have you gotten to the second one yet? Have you gotten to the second book yet?
No,
All right, then you might have some surprises about your current feelings, but you'll have to read it. It was one of the things I hated most out of all of the movies.
oh,
So
I
you,
bet. I'm already like finding stuff that I don't like just having read like having read the Fellowship, the first half of the book doesn't line up with the movie at all. Um, I'm like, I'm in this now, like, so I'm definitely gonna. I'll have more come the Two Towers and the Return of the King, I'm sure. Just because the books are just they're rich, they're really good, and like
very
part of me wishes that I probably would have. I wish I would have sat down and like forced myself through them before watching the movies.
Yes.
I have enough like knowledge about the movies and about the books at this point where I can go and I can like separate the two and go, hey, the books are actually better than the movies are.
Yeah.
And like just having read, I've read The Hobbit, I've read The Fellowship all the way through. You, if anybody else is listening to this, read those books. If you like the movies, you're going to like the books a lot more. The Rings of Power, I think that's supposed to be loosely based off the Silmarillion, or at least some of the story of the Silmarillion. I haven't gone through the Silmarillion yet, so I'm actually kind of curious to make my way through that one too. And maybe we'll do that. When we get there, we'll talk about the Silmarillion a little bit and the Rings of Power when the show's kind of wrapped up and kind of give an overview of that. We are planning on talking about the Rings of Power later on. As far as our schedule goes,
I'm sorry. I had a.
Oh, there's more. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Cranberrylangers.
I apologize. I'm taking it back. Sorry to interrupt the outro. Well, another thing is, Boromir, actually, in my opinion, he was. It was either a tie, or I would feel that Boromir came out on top as far as respectability, or as far as like courageousness or outward, like not bravery so much, so to say, but kind of yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, over Aragorn, and that's something you don't really see. You see him always kind of slighted, always having some kind of character defect apparent, and he wasn't. He was a guy who went out. He traveled alone all the way to the last homely house, all the way over to Rivendell alone, just a guy from Rohan, or yeah, all the way from there to get to this place because he felt he should, and he fought enemies all along the way by himself, solo. So he's not really he's nothing to scoff at. He's nothing to sneeze at. You know, he's a big, powerful dude, and he's doing stuff for his countrymen.
And they didn't really give that a fair shake in the movie either. Like when you're in Rivendell in the movie and they're having the whole council there, like you know almost nothing about him when they go to leave. And like at this council, like they talk about, hey, like this guy came all the way from over here against like the wishes of his community and fought because he felt like this was the right place for him to be. And like that's a pretty big part of the story. They skipped it entirely. And so you're kind of left here thinking like when you're watching the movie, I remember like looking at Boromir, like seeing him and the whole interaction with Frodo in the ring, and you're like, oh, this is not a good dude. Like, and then having read the book, like my perception of him totally changes, and I'm like, no, Boromir's like a great dude.
Yes,
and,
he's an awesome dude.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, like they really messed up this character here, and I mean,
they totally made him. They totally made him. You know, a morally deficient person, like a really immoral, like flaky dude.
yeah, like he was just out for power, and that's all he wanted. And like, granted, him and Aragorn definitely had like their kind of like side, kind of like sneering in the book, like when they're having conversation, because Aragorn says who he is, and like there is a part where Boromir is kind of like, all right, but you know, and like that is evident in the book, but it's not anywhere close to what the movie portrays it as. And I think that they definitely elevated that to create tension between the characters, the Hollywood effect yet again, and Aragorn is equivalent in his heroicness to Boromir, in my opinion. Like these guys are not either one greater than the other. Like they kind of stand at the same level for me right now, having read The Fellowship.
you will see events at the beginning of the next book, and you're gonna have your brain's gonna you're gonna be like, oh, whoa, I think, and then you're gonna see the quality of the fellowship, and then but later on, you're also gonna see where these two sit at, and yeah, I think that they are those guys, Aragorn, Gimli, um, Boromir, and Legolas. They all have they are all like the top, right? They're all they're all at the top, and they're at the top there for an obvious reason. And yeah, they're all there. None of them are lower, and it's awesome. It's just the Lord of the Rings movies. I felt they just played everything. They took everything down so low, and I think either Peter Jackson had a crush on the lady who played Arwen, and that's why he had her in that part of the movie, or he just wanted to have some like introduce her or have more girl power. I don't know, but either way, that kind of stuff doesn't belong in the Lord of the Rings.
I think as far as Hollywood goes, having like a strong female character is a draw to bring in different people.
You don't have to. Here's the thing about the books. You don't have to be the person. You don't have to be represented physically by the people that you're seeing. You don't have to see your representation to identify with a person. I am not a hobbit, and I identify with
Are you sure?
great of throwing skills of like rocks and things. I'm not that great with I'm not that silent when I walk, although I try. Yeah, but but yeah, you don't have to. And if something is applicable to your life, if there's a story, or if there's a lesson, or if there is a character that speaks to you, and some of their struggles, some of their histories, if it speaks to you, you don't have to be that person for it to speak to you. If it's applicable to a man, it's most likely applicable to a woman. That's
Yeah, and I think that there was plenty of other female characters that they could have used. For example, Goldberry, Tom Bombadil's wife. um, I'm there are other characters available, and not that Arwen isn't in the books, because she is, and like they definitely could have used her, but they made her into at least a warrior here in the first movie, doing these things that she doesn't do in the book at all.
no.
And go ahead.
Yeah, there are things about sacrifice that don't necessarily mean sacrifice of your physical life, or your put you in immediate danger. There are things about sacrifice, like sacrifice of your station, sacrifice of your security, sacrifice of maybe your family line or something. These things are not anything to disregard. Sacrifice of your comfort, but and in Galadriel, if you want to have more screen time of a lady, a powerful woman, you could have done it with Galadriel, and there was a lot of potential there. And even she wasn't portrayed exactly.
Rings of power.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. For the month of October here, we have a couple of episodes planned. We do have a Halloween special coming up at the end of the month where we're going to have a guest with us. We're going to be covering some of those SCP stories that we know people like, and dive into those and some of the history with that. So that should be fun. We're planning on, in our next episode, I believe, talking about Samurai. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about Samurai Jack. And hopefully by then we'll have the Wilhelm Scream back with us, and maybe I'll be hyped up on coffee, and so we'll be a little bit more energetic. We'll see what happens. Yeah. I am going to have a channel that will be known as The Cape is a Lie. I do not have a video out yet. We're into like how many episodes now, and I don't have anything going yet. This is kind of sad. Maybe it is going to be the ongoing joke. We'll just leave it as the ongoing joke.
You'll just.
Cranberrylangers.
I have a channel which I've been working on a review of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show for like the last I guess it's like 6 months now or something, but or 4 months, 5 months. But I'm planning on putting that out. You can see me there. You can follow me on Twitter. And you can also leave comments or whatever on my stuff or in our stuff about any suggestions for future episodes. But yeah, we're doing Samurai Jack, and I'll also tell you that I have kind of a history of SCP Foundation and the SCP monsters and things, so that would be pretty interesting. But I look forward to seeing you there next time on that episode, Mr. Capus Law.
Should be awesome. I'm actually really excited about this SCP thing.
I'm honestly more excited to see your response for the next episode of Lord of the Rings with the Two Towers. So
we'll get there. Just so everyone's aware, if you could like and subscribe, we will have more conversation on Lord of the Rings coming up through the following months. November and December, we've already got planned out here. We'll have plenty of good conversation to come. Go ahead and give us a follow, give us a like. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you, you nerds. And we'll talk to you later.